Our next speaker, though, I'm really excited about our next speaker. He is one of the first people I actually met when I started this journey a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago. Super nice guy. And the easiest way to describe him is imagine Gant, but as an adult. You see what I'm saying? Like all grown up and reasonable and intelligent. That's exactly what Nader would be like. He is just this wonderful guy. He has written, I think, 2 or 3 books. He's going to tell you more about it. And you're just going to learn a lot from a really genuine, good guy. Ladies and gentlemen, please bang your hands together for the wonderful Nader Dabit.
All right, can everyone hear me? Let's see here. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be at any event where Kenneth is presenting. In fact, I will probably just say yes, just because he's doing any other event in the future, just because he always speaks so highly of me and kind of gives me a lot of, I guess, ego for the next couple of days, couple of weeks. So yeah, I'm gonna be enjoying that now. I think he's like really always talks about me in a way that makes me feel really good. So I always kind of notice that. Anyway, I'm really excited to be presenting with any event that's kind of tied to Mississippi, and MagnoliaJS has been amazing. I remember when we had the first one in Jackson, and it was just a massive success. And I'm really excited to kind of see it continue going on here. So I'm excited to be presenting, and hopefully I will see everyone in person next year at the MagnoliaJS in Jackson, Mississippi again. But today I'm going to be presenting something that is fairly new to me, but it's become one of the most exciting things that I've ever done in my tech career. So I really hope that people, like this presentation. And even if you don't investigate any of this stuff, I hope it kind of opens your mind to some of the things that are going on that I personally didn't realize were happening in the web ecosystem. So with that being said, let me go ahead and share my screen. And let's see here. Okay, so it looks like I'm sharing my screen. So now I want to go ahead and hit play and welcome you to my talk. So my talk is titled Web2 to Web3. This talk has evolved a lot over the last couple of weeks, actually. The slides will be available later, and I will be sharing those with everyone. So if you don't know me, I've actually transitioned recently out of the cloud working at AWS. Still super interested in all that stuff, but now I'm actually focused on something completely different. And this is kind of going to talk about some of the reasons that I switched and joined this company called Edge and Node. My name is Nader Dabit. I'm a senior developer advocate, or a developer relations engineer, I guess at this point. That's my official title at a company called Edge and Node. Edge and Node is something that's only been around for a couple of months now. And we officially, kind of as a title, support protocols and dApps in the DeFi and Web3 ecosystem. One of the projects that we work closely with is the Graph. And that's one of the examples that I'm going to be kind of talking about later on. And the Graph is an indexing protocol for querying data from decentralized data sources. Mainly at the moment today, this is blockchain data. In the future, we're going to be expanding to other data sources as well. And one of the things that Edge and Node also participates in, so we support the Graph in a couple of different ways, but we also support the broader decentralized and Web3 ecosystem with venture capital, product development, investing in and collaborating with people in the different Web3 ecosystem, different parts of the Web3 ecosystem, and also just trying to find cool things and help work on those, and also kind of spread awareness around some of the things going on. So hopefully by the end of this talk, you kind of have a better idea of what Web3 means in the first place. So I want to talk about Web2 to Web3, and this is going to be kind of a combination of my understanding as of today of like what Web3 means, and also a little bit about my own transition. So I'm actually presenting today, not from my cool office. Instead, I am hitting the road for the first time in a little over a year, and I'm in Miami for 11 days. I'm excited to be here. A lot of stuff going on here. I've only been here for a day, but I've already run into so many people moving down here from San Francisco and New York and all parts of the United States. It's really cool area right now. A lot of hype happening here, and Bitcoin Miami is next week, so I'm going to be maybe going to that conference as well, but mainly just hanging out with a bunch of people in the tech ecosystem. So the reason I'm down here is because of some of the stuff that I've been working on. So Web 2, Web 1, Web 3, what is all this stuff? So I think like what you typically see is like the evolution of the web partitioned into like these three different evolutions, or three different pieces, I guess. Web 1 was kind of the early web. It was the read-only web. The only people that were kind of creating content were typically developers. So the only person that could actually create something and have it hosted somewhere was someone that knew how to maybe write some HTML and some CSS and maybe read text from some type of file system. And as a consumer of the web, I was a reader only. So I could only read information. I couldn't really do a lot of updates or anything like that interacting with the database. But what most of us have experienced in our lives is Web 2. And Web 2 is kind of the current phase that we're in. And I personally believe that we're kind of like hitting the end of this phase. Web 2 is the interactive web, anything that allows someone to be a creator. And as we've noticed, we are all now becoming creators. So YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all these different platforms make it really easy for us to create and share information and images and videos and all types of stuff. And Web 2.0 has been really great. We've been able to kind of do a lot of amazing things, and it's pushed humanity forward, but of course with drawbacks like any technology. But I think there's a lot of areas that can be improved, and these are some of the things that I want to talk about today. Now, the first time I really heard about Web3, I started doing a lot of research and kind of wanting to understand what it means. But essentially, you could think of like Web3 as the decentralized web, and with decentralization brings a few important distinctions from Web 2, what we're used to, as well as some important characteristics that I think are positives. And one of the talks that I came on was from Juan Benet, and I definitely recommend following him or finding some of his videos and watching them about this subject, because he's talked about them in depth. And one of the most interesting slides that I saw from him was this slide here, where he kind of said, what are the Web3 values? Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, users control and own their own data without central control, so meaning decentralized. And I think that's the core of all of this, is decentralization. All interactions are verifiable, in these other three. So I kind of like took those and I was like, okay, let me make a slide that kind of goes over some of these things and just line them up and kind of try to compare what is different from what we're used to versus what he's talking about. And I think the things that stood out to me the most were the decentralized infrastructure. What does verifiable interactions mean? Like, what does privacy actually mean as well? And how do you kind of go about maybe building out some of this stuff? And understanding like what are the trade-offs and why do people even care about any of this stuff? Because to me, it didn't seem that interesting to me, to be honest, or I would say like maybe not that important. And then the more I kind of started diving into it, I also noticed a couple of other characteristics. Web3 is stateful, and what we're used to doing in the Web 2 world is having a stateless web. When we want to store some data or we want to do something with data and persist it, there isn't a mechanism that allows us to do that in the web in a way that is built into the web. Instead, we go to AWS or we go to Azure or we go to some cloud provider, and we kind of like spin up a database and it's hosted there, and that's our state. There is no state built in. And then also what's really interesting is built-in payments. So we're going to dive into a lot more of both of those in just a moment. So if we look at the typical web infrastructure that we're used to, this is very, very like a very boiled down version of that. But if you look at almost any application that you've ever worked with, it looks something like this. If you like really distill it down into like its most basic form, you have a client application. The client interacts with the server somewhere, and that server talks to some database or some data source, right? That database could be a file system, it could be a database, or it could be static information, whatever. either way, this is kind of like what we're so used to doing. But how are these things implemented? Well, for the most part, we're now using these cloud providers. So we have AWS, Azure, GCP, IBM, DigitalOcean, and like I would say those, some of the main ones, right? And they take up a large portion of the market share. Now, there are some trade-offs here, of course, and that's kind of what I want to go into. It's really, really easy to kind of get a lot of this stuff up and running. It's also very performant, but there are drawbacks. And there are also drawbacks around the business models that evolve from the way that we kind of are building apps today. So my next question was, okay, so if this is how we're building apps today, like what does this actual web infrastructure look like in Web3? So what if I wanted to build out one of these apps like that he's talking about? And I wanted to kind of make all of these characteristics happen in my app. How would I actually do that? So that's really kind of the things that I started diving into. And those are the things that I'm still uncovering. And we actually at Edge and Node have a full-time couple of researchers that are kind of fleshing out the different pieces for this stack, because we're still fairly early on. There are a lot of production dApps out there, and dApps is like decentralized apps, but I don't think it's polished enough, like to the point where we are with Web2, right? Because we've been building out Web2 for 20 or so years. We're still a little bit early on in Web3. Now, before we kind of talk about decentralized web infrastructure and kind of how this stack looks, let's kind of look at how we've had already experienced decentralization in the Web2 world. And when you talk about, a lot of times people talk about decentralization and they talk about disruption. I think those two things kind of go hand in hand. And I'm a big fan of disruption. Decentralization, now let's talk about like a long time ago when we used to consume our news media. In the past, we had a TV set and maybe even a website, and we would go to like one of these few places and we would get our information. And that was kind of the limit of where we would be able to consume our information. We had the newspapers, we had the TV channels, and this was controlled by not very many people, right? So there was like maybe 5, 10, 20, I don't know, like massive companies. And all of these companies kind of control where all of this information is coming from. The internet brought about the decentralization of news. So now I can go to Twitter and I can actually follow a reporter or a person on the ground with their camera showing me exactly what's happening in this place. And there are now no intermediaries, right? I can kind of like figure out whether I want to follow this person or that person. But either way, there is not a lot of, I would say, friction or a lot of things happening in between me and this person. It is essentially kind of like a peer-to-peer connection, right? So like, I would say decentralization kind of introduces this peer-to-peer interaction, and peer-to-peer is like a really important concept to understand in some of this stuff. YouTube and TikTok are presenting ways for media to be decentralized. I no longer need to go to New York or Los Angeles and get hired by some or get discovered by someone to become an actor. Instead, I can go make a name for myself. I can go directly to the people and I can present myself and I can become famous online, and I can kind of like go have a direct way to kind of get there without needing these big intermediaries. So we're getting rid of the intermediaries there. Hotels. So there are no longer just 5 or 6 big hotel chains that I can go to. I can now go directly to my neighbor or someone living in Florida, and I can say, hey, I want to rent your house. And Airbnb provided the platform for decentralizing hotels, essentially. A lot of different concepts like this are happening, right? And we're kind of used to that at this point. So I think the core thing to understand here with Web3 is that Web3 introduces decentralizing web infrastructure. And this is going to be extremely important in how we build apps in the future, in my opinion. And decentralizing web infrastructure is kind of the same as decentralizing everything else. You get rid of the middleman and you enable interactions to happen peer-to-peer. So with that being said, let's take a look at the business models of the Web2 applications, or the applications that we're used to working with on a day-to-day basis. So in the form of like as part of your business model, one of the things you have to kind of think about is your business creation. Like when someone creates something, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it, but the main 2 ways are either venture capital or bootstrapping. With venture capital, there are a few different trade-offs. First of all, you have dilution of ownership and control. So let's say I want to kind of build out an idea. I need to now shop this around, and I'm going to need to now give away like 5% or 10% of my company or even more. And not only am I giving away ownership, but I'm also, again, giving away control. And these people that are going to now be giving me money are now going to be having a lot more say-so around how I run my business. The return on investment for venture capital is often very, very long-term. We're talking about a couple of years, maybe 5 or 10 years or longer. In fact, there are companies that are still like worth billions of dollars that still haven't made a single penny, right? So a lot of the times with these types of companies, the return on investment, it takes a very long time. And the investors also have very concerning, like to me, concerning expectations for how much money they're going to get as a return on their investment. They don't want 2x or 3x, they want like 100x. And these are the things that people refer to as unicorns. They're looking for a unicorn. And to become a unicorn, you have to do wild things, and you have a very low, I would say, success rate to become a unicorn, because you're not just looking for something sustainable, you're looking for something that is an outlier. You want your company to be an outlier. And to get there, you end up having to do a lot of interesting things, sometimes ethical, sometimes unethical. Also, when you're talking about the other option is bootstrapping. Now, this is a very high risk thing to do, because let's say I'm working at a company and I'm getting paid like 200K a year. I have to now like quit my job to maybe go spend some time building this thing on my own. This means it's not accessible to everyone, because most people can't just do that. You have to be kind of, in a privileged position, I would say, to do that. And there is a big downside here, because if it doesn't work out, you've lost a lot of time, you've lost a lot of money, and you're kind of like have to essentially maybe start over by working at another company. Now, as far as the actual monetization of your app, once you get there, a lot of applications that you see today, and I would say if you look at the largest amount of time that we spend on applications, the applications that we use are actually monetized in this way. So imagine the 5 hours that you spend every week on apps. Like, what are you spending your time on? You could almost, I would say for certain, for most people, say that these apps are run in this way, where they're selling ads and they're selling your data. This is a tweet for today. So what happens when you sell a bunch of data to a company that is going to use it for profit, right? They're going to probably have, your data is going to be all over the place, and there's going to be ways that your data can be leaked or it can be hacked, and it's going to happen more and more. In fact, we see data breaches happening like on a daily or weekly basis at this point. And the more applications that you use, the more places that your data is going to be, and the more vulnerabilities that can possibly happen. So I saw this tweet today from Laurie. His data was leaked because a parking meter he used. So imagine, like, as things become more and more connected and your personal data is tied to all of these different places, like that just doesn't seem like an optimal long-term solution, in my opinion. And when you think about the models of how these applications typically work, they typically have the first step of getting users, and they don't care about making money at this point. They want to provide a slick and sticky user experience. And because of how slick the user experience is, we typically stick around because we enjoy it. They don't shove a bunch of ads the first day for the most part for these apps. And once they've kind of gotten you onto the platform and you're stuck, they start monetizing it. And what I like to call this is progressive decay. Your experience decays, the application decays over time. It doesn't get better, it gets worse. I don't enjoy it when my child picks up the YouTube app and they're served with 1 million ads. That's just not the way that I don't think people expected the web to be, right? Like, we wanted this to be a really great way for people to be connected and share. And I don't think the future of the world is based on all these ads. And there is another way. Think about all the apps that you use on a daily basis: Instagram, LinkedIn. Oh my God, TripAdvisor is absolutely horrendous. All of these free games that you use, all of these things are run on ads. We need another way to go about building apps. And that is where Web3 brings in this native payment strategy. Now, when you hear about cryptocurrency, you often hear about it talked about in a way of speculation and get rich quick and let's effing go and all this crap, right? Like that's one sector. but there's actually a lot of usage and utility out of tokens, and there is actually a lot of interesting things that are happening here. Web3 has a key differentiator, and I think this is what's going to actually make Web3 successful, is Web3 has native payments that are actually built in. And like I mentioned, we have state. State is enabled by native payments. So I'm going to read a couple of like paragraphs that are a little bit boring. Tokens introduce a native payment layer that is completely borderless and frictionless. Companies like Stripe and PayPal have created, and I would say extracted, billions of dollars in value by enabling electronic payments. These systems are overly complex, and they still do not enable true international operability between participants. They also require you to hand over your sensitive information and personal data in order to use them. Now, imagine you have a company and you want to start sending, I don't know, payments to people all over the world, and you want them to start paying you as well. And then when they receive their money, you want to allow them to then spend it as well. Imagine all of the different systems that have to go into place to make this work in today's web. It's very complex. PayPal is a billion-dollar company, multi-billion-dollar company. Stripe, all of these companies were kind of built, and they're so complex, and there's so much things that are happening there, and so much infrastructure that had to be there, and they still do not, I would say, offer true interoperability for me to just build an app and start really taking international payments easily from anyone in the world. So what is the difference between cryptocurrency and tokens? Because I mentioned cryptocurrency and I also mentioned tokens. I think this is just something that I thought was interesting when I learned it. The biggest differentiation between the two is that cryptocurrencies have their own blockchains, whereas crypto tokens are built on existing blockchains. So an example of a cryptocurrency would be Ethereum and Bitcoin, and an example of a token would be something that's built on top of Ethereum. So there's a lot of ERC20 tokens, including one of the ones that our company, that the company that I work with, runs on the graph. So what does all this have to do with web infrastructure? And this is, I think, the core where all this stuff kind of comes together. So decentralized web infrastructure looks something like this, where you have a client application and you have a decentralized network, and all of these different servers or all these different nodes are kind of managing the web infrastructure, and you have some type of incentivization to incentivize people to run these in an honest way. So when you think of a blockchain, this is a really good example of a decentralized network. I'm running my own node, and all these other millions of people are running nodes. When I want to write a transaction to the blockchain, I send it to one of these nodes, and that node is responsible for writing the transaction. And then once they've written that transaction, they broadcast it to some of these other servers, and everyone else verifies it, and then it's written to the ledger, and then everyone else in the network kind of gets it. Now, the incentivization here is tokens. So by writing a transaction to the network, I receive a little bit of money. And when I'm making this transaction, I pay a little bit of money to make this happen. Therefore, we're kind of like giving an incentive for people to write and for the network participants to participate. Now, if I try to write the incorrect information and I try to distribute or kind of like use that and write it to my ledger, one of the other participants is going to say, hey, this isn't correct, and I am not going to get that money. So I'm going to be disincentivized to actually do anything wrong. So only if I do the right things will this work out. So the way that these things are built, and there's actually a really big, like a lot of literature and a lot of like white papers around it, is crypto economics. The way that these things are kind of like, I would say the general outline of how these things work would be like crypto economics, and they are kind of built using or built into what's called a crypto economic protocol. An example of a crypto economic protocol would be something like Ethereum and Bitcoin. These are all crypto economic protocols, and they combine one or more aspects of distributed systems, game theory, cryptography, economics, social and political science, identity, psychology, and more. Now, blockchain to me is not interesting at all. Like when I first learned about it, I thought, okay, that's cool, but you can't use a blockchain as database. That's true, and that's really what's really excited me is when I started learning about all of these other protocols that are actually doing all of the things that you typically would go to the cloud provider for: compute, storage, I don't know, streaming, all the different pieces that you typically would go to a cloud provider are actually also available as protocols, and more are being built every day and more being polished every day. One of the one that I work on, we work on at the Graph or at Edge and Node, it's called the Graph. So the Graph protocol is a indexing, GraphQL indexing layer for blockchain data. So instead of querying data directly from the blockchain, which is very, it doesn't perform well for anything past a very basic query, you typically have to index all of this data in a local database and create APIs on top of it and then expose those. And that kind of breaks the whole idea of decentralization in the first place. So the Graph protocol is a decentralized network of indexers that indexes blockchain data. People can publish APIs to the protocol, and then anyone can use that and query those using GraphQL. It's super interesting. If you want to learn more about it, I would check out some of the docs and stuff. But this is just one of the many protocols that are out there. There are protocols for file storage. There's protocols for things like compute. There's protocols for web hosting. I mean, you name it, someone is building a protocol or has already built a protocol that is out there. And the reason that these tokens exist are people that are participating in this network. They are providing some type of solution for web infrastructure, and someone's consuming that. And all of these things are enabled by these tokens. So this brings the idea again of the economics of this Web3 ecosystem, which is often referred to as tokenomics. And you know, tokenomics, crypto economics, and crypto economic protocols. Do some research on all those. You'll learn a lot. I'm still learning. And this kind of brings about a new way of building companies. So we no longer have to rely on venture capitalists or our life savings. Instead, we can come up with some really interesting ways. So imagine a situation like this. I have a new project that I want to build. I have some type of reputation because I've built a few projects in the past and I know how to write some code. I announce this project. I release X number of tokens, and I also start paying the people that are building this project in these tokens. The people that want to speculate on this project can actually buy these tokens because they want to either participate in the network in some way later, or they think this is going to be successful and the price will go up. Stakeholders can use their tokens to vote on changes of the future project. And people that hold tokens can also signal that they think the project is doing well or doing bad by buying and selling these. So you can kind of almost think of this as like a very, very, very early version of going public without all of the, I would say, complication and things that kind of go along with that. And a lot of companies are doing this. There are literally countless companies that are doing this, and the number is growing wildly. It's actually really wild when you start diving into all the things happening here. It's happening fast as well. And I think that what you're going to see in 5 years is a token economy. And I think that what's going to happen really quickly, and you're starting to even see venture capitalists actually get in on this. VCs are now becoming token holders. They're finding interesting companies, and instead of like giving VC money, they have a lot of money, so they're buying tokens and they're signaling that they think these projects are going to be successful. And I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. If you're interested in learning more about the token economy, there's actually a book called The Token Economy. And I don't know if I'm like going way over or not, but I'm almost done. The Web 2.0 core infrastructure, typically you need compute, identity, data, storage, and web hosting. The Web3 infrastructure looks very similar to that. The only main difference is that you have these smart contracts that enable all of this other stuff. So you have secure money in contracts, verifiable interactions, trustless and self-governing. This enables you to build out these crypto economic protocols. All the different stuff that I kind of talked about are kind of like core to smart contracts. And when you're building on Web3, there are different layers, and I don't have a bunch of time, and I actually cut out a bunch of slides that went over this in a little bit more depth, but you have like these different layers. So like the base layer would be the actual blockchain itself, but there are other layers. And I think a lot of the things that you see happening in the decentralized space with these crypto economic protocols is happening at the layer 2 level. To learn more about this, I would go to Web3, I think it's .org, or just Google Web3 organization, and they have like a whole website that kind of goes into these different layers and how they work. Pretty interesting stuff to me. So how do you actually go about building one of these? Well, you typically, to get started, the most basic thing that you need is a client framework like Vue or React. You need an Ethereum development environment. So hard hat is what I like to use. You need a client library, so Ethers.js, and then you need a wallet installed. MetaMask is the most common one, but there's a bunch of different ones. I like Rainbow a lot. You know, even Coinbase has a wallet now. They just released it not too long ago. And if you want to learn and actually see a tutorial about this, check out the complete guide to full stack Ethereum development. This is a blog post I wrote about a month ago. Over 100,000 people have taken this, and I'm pretty proud about that because it was my first big post on this, and people seem to really love it. You can also check out Scaffold ETH, which is a project generator, and there's actually another couple of ones that I didn't mention here. I think it's Create ETH app is another Ethereum project generator. If you want to learn more about what is Web3, I wrote a post on I'm sorry, not Hacker Noon, but it's Free Code Camp called What is Web3? And also, if you're interested in getting into the space, everyone's hiring. It's a really fun place to be. How to get into Ethereum, crypto, Web3 as a developer on dev.to. And also check out this talk from Yaniv Tal, who is the founder of the company that I work with. And it's a Graph Day keynote from February of 2019. Super interesting talk. And I'm not gonna do the live coding because we don't have time. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. I just wanna say thank you for checking out this talk, and hope you learned a little something. I actually learned a lot over the last couple of months. So this is kind of everything that I learned crammed into this one talk. Thank you.